WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into the spring. Baseball has sprung. The opening of the new CFG Bank Arena, Springsteen, the Eagles. We got concerts, we got things, and the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. Brought to you by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation. Costas, then Fadley's, and next week we're going to be at Pappas up in Bel Air celebrating the opening of their new place. It's Oprah's favorite crab cake. Come on out and have a crab cake with us in Bel Air. And then we're going to be back downtown at Captain Larry's. First time crab cake there on the 27th of the month, and a whole litany of places into May. You know, I mentioned crab cakes to people in town. They're like, hey, Ness, I'll meet you over here. I'll meet you over there. But to the out-of-town people, they're like, got to get down to an Orioles game. Mike Vaccaro has covered sports, a little bit of an Oscar Madison trail from the Midwest and the South to New York. He has been there for 2 decades doing that tabloid thing on the back at the New York Post. Nobody does it better. Writes books about the Yankees and stuff like that. Also had a health challenge as well. And it's great to see you back on the playing field, making threes, hitting them out of the park, doing all that stuff and writing. And, you know, I've been a wannabe Oscar Madison my whole life, Mike. So seeing you get back to doing what you do and bringing real, honest-to-God columnists onto the program is always great. How are you? How you feeling to open a 2023 campaign?
Yeah, I'm doing good, my friend. I am. I'm feeling as good as I've felt in years, and yeah, it's going great. Still having fun doing the job. You know, like you said, I'm one of these guys who takes the job of columnist very seriously. I know it's an honor to occupy that space in the New York Post. Jimmy Cannon used to write that column, so I mean, I've got a lot to live up to every day. But yeah, it's fun. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
You know, I'd go in a million directions because I was in an antique shop a couple weeks ago and I got the old 1966 because I'm a newspaper guy. It's where my start was at the News American. John Stedman in the 66 preview said, it says here Orioles will win the World Series. Printed October 4th. I have the whole section. Aparicio was in it, hence how I got here back in the 60s. And, you know, just all these years later, just to touch it and feel it, being a columnist. Let's start with that then. I mean, we'll do Yankees, do Orioles and all that. Columnists, newspapers, I still get in the subway in New York. I still see, you know, the remnants of what was a whole life of it that began my life as a reporter and all these years, 31 years on radio. But all I ever wanted to be was you. And I told Lupica that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, it's great. And you're right. That's still the kick, is when you're on the subway or when you're at a cafe in New York and you see people with the papers expertly folded up. That's all I've really ever wanted to do. And I've been lucky enough that some people want to grow up and become an astronaut or something. And when I was 7 or 8 years old, I declared to my father I wanted to be the sports columnist for the New York Post. And there aren't a lot of people that I know who get to grow up and do exactly what they said they wanted to do when they were in second grade. But it's
you
great.
And I are the same human being. I mean, that's all I ever wanted to do was be John Stedman.
I've often thought that, to be honest with you, Nestor, because I mean, all I ever did when I was a kid was I immersed myself in the papers. In New York, when I was growing up, it was still the Daily News and the Post and the Times. We didn't necessarily read the Times much in my house, but there was Newsday, there was the Long Island Press. It was great. If you were a sports fan, and specifically if you were somebody who had a kind of a bent to wanting to be Oscar Madison. I mean, let's face it. I mean, I think a lot of people from our generation, Oscar Madison was a sports writer. It's like, wow, you can really do that for a living. And as you and I both discovered, to our great good fortune, you can do that for a living if you get a couple of breaks along the way, and it's amazing what can happen.
Mike, my old man would have hated Oscar Madison's hat because of that Mets thing from '69, and you come on this program and you just bring that pirate hat. And you know what? I'll doff my cap to Clemente, but 79 was,
yep.
I was 11 years old in 79. We lost game 7, right? So like, those are hard times for me, but from a baseball perspective, you can't even hate the Pirates because they have less of a chance than the Orioles of ever being the next team to have a parade around here. You're right about the Yankees and the Mets, and it's still a thing there. The Orioles opened in Boston last week. It's still a thing there. Although, I mean, I've had Shaughnessy and Bob Ryan on this program for all my life. For 30 years, those guys have been coming on. Shaughnessy ran around with Earl Weaver here back in the day, right. Was here. And they tell me baseball's number 3 in Boston now, behind the Patriots, behind the Celtics. And For New York and being all that it is, and I see what's happened to horse racing here. And then I
Right.
go up to New York when I think of like the Post, and those things were built on horse racing and boxing,
100%.
back in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
100%.
Modern vernacular for a columnist. What makes your bell ring other than just you've always written about the Yankees, the Rangers, and whatever? But as a columnist, what's your job these days?
I think there are two things. One, I mean, look, we have to keep you know, the powerful accountable, right? So, I mean, for years, it meant getting after the Wilpon family because they treated the Mets like like a second-rate operation. For years it meant getting after the Johnson family with the Jets because it didn't seem like they cared very much about what happened there. For years it was getting after, it still, in some ways means getting after James Dolan because he runs two teams here. A
But
lot of
that
times,
begins with Steinbrenner, right? I mean, was there that kind of pressure on ownership in the 50s and 60s? If there were, the Dodgers and Giants wouldn't have skipped, probably, right?
yeah, they skipped in spite of the fact they were getting killed. So I mean, I think it probably isn't that much different. I mean, because let's face it. I mean, the bottom line is the almighty buck now, and it was certainly that's the reason why Walter O'Malley left for California, and so they didn't care if Dick Young or Milton Gross was going to go after them in the papers, because
Well, John Stedman, we lost the Colts and the Bullets. I mean, these municipalities have gone. Even New York lost teams,
oh
right?
yeah,
Literally.
yeah. We mean, and I think in some ways Baltimore and New York and our soulmates that way, along with other places that it's one of the great ironies, right, about Baltimore is that they lost the Colts and they took the Browns, but the Browns, they got their own team. I mean, it's St. Louis, was took the Rams and they lost the Rams. I mean, it's really kind of I think it's a story unto itself about what happens to a city's self-esteem and reputation when they lose a team, when they get a team. It's really that's a whole conversation unto
That's
itself.
like a Springsteen song, "Whores and Gamblers."
That's true. And look, I mean, there are still there are still enough people in New York who were around when the Giants and the Dodgers were, who still find that to be the greatest felony of all time. And look, I mean, if I had grown up a Dodgers fan and suddenly I couldn't root for the Dodgers anymore, if I could, but I couldn't watch them anymore because they were 3,000 miles away, or the same thing with the Colts, in Baltimore, I feel the same way. And I think that's I guess that's a roundabout way of
Mike, I
saying
keep this. This is my childhood Baltimore Colts belt
it's
buckle. I
awesome.
keep this
That's
5 feet away because it's always there, and I wore it as a little boy. We got it at Sears over at the mall,
that's awesome.
and but I've been buying old Houston Oilers stuff here as well. But
Yeah.
the modern part of being a columnist, you said hold power accountable. Let's keep going down that road because I really think that in my town, they've thrown me out after 27 years, right? Like I don't get they
This is a
credential my
subject.
employee, but
This is
not
a
me.
subject close to your heart, I know. So yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's a fascinating thing that there's no one of any power in the media here to hold them accountable because they've bought the whole media here,
Right.
right? Right.
Exactly.
So and the sun is where it is, and the banner's trying to get where they're going, and whether it'll ever have what you had in New York, which is you're not going to pull this. Although Trump, I guess, pulled it off until like Tuesday, right? Pulled it off all of a lifetime, right? Managed to do it.
Yeah.
But there is a notion that Steinbrenner sort of brought the heat onto everyone across baseball, across sports, to say, I want to win and I'll cut your throat to win, right?
Yeah, for sure. And he kind of raised the standard for how we look at modern sports owners too, because I think really the first, if you're an owner, the things the fans will want to know is you care. They want to know that you care as much as they do. Even if you don't, you got to put on an act that you care as much as they do, because they do care. Fans go to bed at night and they don't sleep if they lose a 3-2 game in the 11th inning, and they want to know the owner feels that way too. One reason why Mets fans love Cohen so much, Steve Cohen so much, isn't just his money, but he's clearly a Mets fan. I mean, he spent opening day with the 7 line, which is a group of rabid Mets fans down in Miami. And I think that's that really matters. Number two, close behind, is that you back up that fandom by using your resources to make sure that they're as good as they can be. I mean, Steinbrenner was always that way. He would never go for a half dollar if he could pay $1, and that's the way it is now with Steve Cohen. And third, I think is just that they want to be able to have a good experience when they decide to invest their money in your product, which is to go to a game, or to, or to buy a season package or whatever it is. It's really not a lot to ask for, I think. And I think owners, it's remarkable actually how much um, owners have spaced on that through the years, not realizing how important all of those things are.
Well, Art came off the boat here with the stolen Ravens, brought a family business here that he was always in front of in Cleveland. Say what you want about Art, but Art was at the theater, Art was at the clinic, Art was in the city, Art was writing checks, Art was having banquets, Art was putting on college football games, Art was trying to get a baseball stadium, but like all of that, Art showed up here very old, kind of tired version of that, and David, but they had to rebuild it again. And the Ravens were built here, PSL money, all of that stuff, but it was built on like shows like mine over at the barn with Tony Saragusa that felt like Artie Donovan a generation before and Odell Bracy and all of that. That never really existed in New York, like from a community standpoint. I wonder what ties people to the New York Knicks and Rangers. I literally, Dolan's such a prick. I saw him suing the attorneys for walking into the, like I see all that, and I love the Garden. I want to come up to the Garden to see a show. I might be coming up to see Depeche Mode next week because anything at the Garden is worth $100 more than anywhere else for me. That's how much I love coming up there. But I wonder, like, who are these people paying $800 to go to Knicks games and like why and hanging on? And the Orioles, there's been such attrition here as the Yankees come in here. And you know what it's looked like here the last 20 years, 25 years since this gem of a ballpark was built. But tying to sports in a place like New York, it's so different. And I've never really understood what makes people come into the big city and spend all this money on teams that are, competing, but they're making bucks. I mean, they're about making money. You go to Yankee Stadium, you swim in the money that they're making.
It's true. I mean, look, I just think the whole dynamic of sports fans is interesting to see how it evolves because look, when you and I were kids, I mean, you grew up an Orioles fan, a Colts fan, because you were in Baltimore. I grew up a Mets fan or an Islanders fan, whatever, because I grew up on Long Island in New York, and a lot of it had to do with geography. A lot of it had to do with it was a family heirloom. I mean, if your grandfather or your father was a Giants fan, you were probably a Giants fan. That's just the way it was. You see that you've seen that over time evolve in New York. I mean, I think very similar to what you're describing with the Orioles. There was a lot of football fan attrition when I was growing up in the '70s because the Jets and the Giants were so terrible. So I mean, and so it was not unusual. Like in your group, group of friends, there'd be a Steelers fan, a Dolphins fan, a lot of Cowboys fans, obviously. But now it's even more so because there's access to everything. If you grew up in, if you grew up in Silver Springs, Maryland, and you decide you want to be a Chargers fan, you can watch all the Chargers games, right? If you grew up in West Hempstead, New York, like I did, and decide that you want to be a Portland Trailblazers fan because you're a big Dame Lillard fan, guess what? You can watch all their games too. And so none of the traditional bindings are there anymore. And so I think that's different also. But so I think it makes it even more amazing when a team like the Knicks, not so much this year because they've been successful this year, but most of the last 25 years when they've just been garbage, they still put 17, 18,000 people in the stands. A lot of that is tourists, I mean, people from out of town who want to see the Garden. But there's enough people who just keep the faith. And it's weird because the Knicks specifically, in between their two periods of prosperity, the '70s, the great teams then, and the '90s, I mean, nobody went to the Garden. I mean, you go to the Garden when I was a kid, and there'd be 7,000, 8,000 people there. It's like, the Mets, when I was growing up a Mets fan, I mean, in the awful days of the late '70s, early '80s, I mean, one year in 1979, they drew 788,000 fans in New York City, in a building that, a couple, that years later would draw 3 and 4 million people.
I thought Ed Kranepool was more interesting than that, Mike.
Yeah, I did too. Believe me. I mean,
and John Stearns, all those guys,
honestly,
right? Yeah.
I mean, if you could define my childhood from about 1974 to about 1986 or so.
There's a lot more Felix Mion there than there is, Mookie Wilson.
Hey, in my neighborhood, all the kids wanted to be Felix Mion, choking up and you get the bat. I mean, he was our guy. And in a lot of ways, look, I mean, when I look back on my fandom, okay, I mean, I found it a lot more enjoyable when my teams stunk. I mean, but that's just, me. I mean, but also as a fan in those years, I mean, I wasn't really investing much. I went to one game a year. I watched the game on free TV. I listened to it on radio. It's a lot different situation now for fans. I mean, fans are expected to pay up more now, and so as a result, they're more demanding, and they should be more demanding because they're part of the product now.
He is Mike Vaccaro. You can read his work out on the interwebs and at New York Post and NY Post and all of the comings and goings of New York sports. He's caught in the crosshairs of every Aaron Rodgers rumor that leads to a Lamar Jackson rumor and all that. Again, I guess from the columnist standpoint in accountability and ownership, and to your point, what the Jets have put their fans through and what the Giants have put their fans through lately. And I'm an apostle to Ernie Accorsi. Ernie was a little bit of a crazy uncle to me back in the day. So was George Young. He was the mean school teacher uncle, as I'm sure you remember. But they were run by Baltimore people for years when we didn't even have a franchise after Ernie left Art. All of that beat them in the Super Bowl now 22 years ago. But the accountability for the younger Steinbrenner, for the Mets ownership groups that have come and gone now, and now they're on to a new thing, that there's something about you as a columnist and everyone in New York that really the owners are always in the spotlight, whereas the creep that's owned the baseball team and now this kid that was born on third that thinks he hit a triple jumping out this week. John Angelos has been in the media 4 or 5 times in the last 5 days. That's 5 more times than his old man has been in since he got booed on Cal Ripken night in 1995. Literally.
Sure. No, it's true. I mean, look, and I think it's part of the reason why owners become owners in the first place. At least that's the case in New York. I mean, Steve Cohen could have, lived a pretty happy life with $15 billion in his savings account.
Could have bought an island.
I mean, he could have done anything he wanted to do. But, and maybe some people know he was the inspiration for Acts on Billions. But the fact is, I mean, he was living a fairly anonymous life, and now he's not. Now he can't go anywhere without being recognized. Now everybody knows who Steve Cohen is. Now, whenever the Mets do well, it's, Steve Cohen's Mets. And when the Mets are struggling, Mets have lost the last 2 games now, by the way, by scoring 19-0 to the Brewers. So, maybe it's not so great, for him being the Steve Cohen Mets right now for Steve Cohen, but guys become owners because it allows them an opportunity to be known, and in ways that other businesses just do not. And so as a result of that, the flip side of that is that we know and we care about them and they're targets. And they're targets of praise, when things go well, and targets of scorn when things don't, because ultimately everybody hates their boss, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they don't hate their boss. They've got issues with their boss, and sports team owners are the ultimate bosses because they're easy to rail against when things are bad, and easy to thank when things go well. I mean, as much as Mets fans despise the Wilpon ownership, when they made a magical run in 2015 to Game 5 of the World Series, you know what? You didn't hear much Wilpon bashing for at least 6 months after that.
Well, yeah, a little bit of time, and then it wears off. You think a championship, I think, gives you 5-year halo, but it really doesn't. Mike, for me in Baltimore, we have these 2 teams. The Ravens are really a miracle, right? Like Jack Kent Cooke never wanted them here. We had to go steal a team. So all the money, all of that. Then the Nationals happened, and all this money was supposed to float to fund the Orioles and keep guys like Manny Machado here and all that. And the old man just screwed it up. Now we have Fredo. Bisciotti has disappeared, threw me out, disappeared, stopped doing press conferences. Once Ray Rice connected with his wife's jaw on the glass elevator, they've gone in a different direction as an organization with how they treat the media, the fans, accountability, any of that. Stadium has a lot of empty seats. The football stadium, dirty little secret. It's not what it used to be. But the feeling for me with Bisciotti after 20 years and the Angelos family after 30 years, and we've now moved from where it's going to be a guy who has a boat who was a Maryland fan and a lawyer that sued people to hit the lottery to corporations, right? Like this $7 billion thing that's about to happen with the Commanders that's going to lead to wherever Bisciotti's going to go because he's not doing it to his kids. There's going to be 2 other owners in Baltimore at some point. For you, this is the columnist part. What's a good owner do? Cohen comes in, he's anonymous. How do you take over the Mets, become famous, and do a good job? What's a good owner in 2023?
Honestly, in some ways, you got to be lucky. I mean, I think because for Cohen, everything he does is going to be defined by the fact that he's paying $357 million for his team this year. So if he wins, you almost can't. He can't win because Well, of course you're going to win. You have $350 million payroll. And if he loses, then all of a sudden they break out the old worst team money can buy scenario. So it's almost losers. But I think what you do, and I think what Cohen has done specifically, I'll speak just to him, is that what he's done is he's tried to set up, thing one for him is a set up an infrastructure of how to do things well. He's borrowed from teams that do well. Look, the Dodgers, maybe the Orioles can't aspire to be what the Dodgers are because they just don't have the resources, but the Mets can. So they can have, the best analytics team in place. They can have the best scouting team in place. They can have a lot of checks and balance system just because, the owner can afford to pay for it, and that's the primary advantage. So people look at owners and say, well, they can get as many players as they want. But to me, the successful operations are good operations. So you look at the very best franchises in sports, they not only have really good players who are making the teams competitive every year, but they have really good front office types who are top of the line what they do, who are cutting edge, who aren't afraid of new systems and new thoughts and new ideas. And going right down, again, we were talking about, they have smart PR people who understand that while ours is a contentious relationship, they can still, even in 2023, it's helpful to have, a favorable column in the newspaper. It's good to have favorable chatter on talk radio. They don't have to generate all of the good news themselves in their own house organ operations. Good PR people understand that even if, maybe you and I don't have the uber influence that maybe Dick Young or John Stedman had, a couple of generations ago, it's still good to have a working relationship with the press, not an always antagonistic relationship with the press. I know what you've gone through with the Ravens. We've all gone through it up here with the Knicks, who are just, they run the worst media operation in the world, and it kills them. They're just too dumb to realize that it kills them. Jalen Brunson's having one of the great seasons in the league this year. Nobody knows who he is, what he does, what he's doing, because the Knicks operate their, PR department, as if they're living in Des Moines. It's silly and it's really counterproductive. It's going to cost Jalen Brunson probably the most improved player award and probably a spot on one of the 3 All-NBA teams, and it's just ridiculous.
The guy who runs it, that's the way he wants the media treated.
Because that's how he wants the media treated. Right? And it all devolves from one person's warped view of what the media is, because he's gotten ripped in the papers, because he's deserved to get ripped. None of this happens by accident.
I bet he's also gotten praised in the paper too. Maybe not for that half-ass band I saw with Henley a couple years ago, but
yes, to a degree. Look, I get it. The fact is, he looks at the scoreboard and he sees the media, lying against him. Well, because he's done a lot of dumb things that have required the media to criticize him. That's how it works.
Well, that's the way the Orioles, come on. How could you not criticize the Orioles here over 30 years if you had your eyes open, literally?
So it's so people say, well, the media is so negative. Well, Nestor, this is what I live by. People say, all you want is clicks. All you want is people to sell newspapers. Well, yes. How do you think we make our money? We make our money from clicks. We're not a nonprofit here, but they say, well, you just do it to be negative. Well, I got news for you. You know what? When the teams around here are good, that's good for business, for our business. When the Mets are in the World Series, you can't find a paper because they've all been sold out.
Like I'd say to Steve Bisciotti, have you seen my work? Do you think I want you to lose? What benefit has it been that Peter Angelos has come in and destroyed the city for 30 years? My last name's Aparicio. This show started with baseball, and which brings me full circle. Yankees. Where are you? We talk Mets. Yankees are the ones here. It's fascinating. I'm with a New York columnist, and all we talked about is Mets.
Which is funny because look, we talk about owners. You talk about the Steinbrenner family specifically. Look, George was over the top. He loved the back page. He's a guy who got it. He really was the old school that said, I don't care if you're ripping me or you're praising me, as long as you're talking about me, that's all that matters. And so that's that's catnip for reporters. His son is very much the other way. He's a good. He seems like a very good guy from as much as we get to know him. But he's just he does not seize the spotlight in any way, shape, or form. Doesn't want the spotlight, and certainly isn't inclined to be like his father, which is to be over the top financially. Now he's got more people to answer to than his father did. But but look, here's the thing about the Yankees, though, and you're right. It's funny because people criticize Steinbrenner all the time, and I laugh. They criticize Brian Cashman, and I laugh. All the Yankees have done is gone to the playoffs, something like two times the last, or 20 times the last 25 years, something like that. That's a pretty good run. They're in it every year. They won 5 championships since '96.
I always think as like somebody that's been to all those World Series games back in the Torrey era, and I mean, I did all of it a dozen times. I thought that if I were me and a Yankee fan and I Billy Crystal hat on, I'd be a little bored with it. You know what I mean? Like they win too much.
Yeah, I mean, look. I mean, I think even Yankees fans would admit that they get spoiled. Look, because they've been encouraged to. I mean, look, the Yankees' own mission statement tells you that if they don't win a championship every year, it's not a good year. I think that's a pretty impossible standard, but good for them. That's I'd rather have that if I was a fan than somebody who you question whether they really care one way or the other. And look, you've never been there's never been a question with the Yankees. They they care, and the people. And you look, I mean, Hal Steinbrenner isn't as out there as George was, but look, he wants to win. He wants another championship. He wants another parade. He does. He just doesn't do it the same way his father did.
Mike Vaccaro does it in the way that Oscar Madison did, and in the way that John Stedman and all the greats do it. The New York Post, you can follow him out there. It's good to see you back doing what you're doing, holding the power, holding accountable to power, and I appreciate you coming on and always being a good guy on the show. I'm sorry I won't run into you in press boxes, but maybe we'll get a seat in Yankee Stadium out there on one of those $9 nights and see Nestor. I didn't even ask you about Nestor Cortez. I'm the other Nestor now, Mike.
Yeah, depends. I mean, I think he's still got some work to do, Nestor, but he's terrific. Put it this way, he honors your name well because he's not only good at what he does, but he's also a good guy.
You know what? I tell him that I loved him when he was here, the 10 minutes he was here, and his ERA was infinity, that I championed him. And I told everybody that a Nestor was going to come back and haunt the Orioles. So we'll see. Mike Vaccaro here from the New York Post. We're doing a Maryland Crab Cake Tour, Costas and Fadley's. And then next week on Thursday, we are at Pappas. Come on out to on the 13th up to Bel Air and join us. Our friends at Window Nation, our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I'll be giving away some scratchers. We've had some cool winners on this instant lottery thing too, Costas and at Fadley's. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.